It's time to take a new approach to finding true fulfillment in your career, health, and state of mind through insightful conversations with those who have found their professional and personal passions while achieving balance. Whether it's entrepreneurs, athletes, or healthcare professionals, we bring you real people, real growth right here on the Boost Podcast. Now, here's your host, Elena Lipson.
Hey Boost Squad, and welcome to episode 21. Elena Lipson here, and I am so thrilled to introduce today's featured guest, Julia Landauer. Julia, are you ready to join the Boost Squad?
You bet.
So before we dive into today's episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Mosaic Growth Partners. Mosaic Growth Partners provides growth strategy consulting to entrepreneurs and organizations in the healthcare and older adult baby boomer market. They can help you bring a new product or service to market, identify and engage new customers and partners, or grow your market share. They also provide coaching and training. For more information, go to mosaicgrowth.com. That's mosaicgrowth.com. Now back to today's featured guest.
Julia is a two-time champion NASCAR racer from New York City, since making history at the age of 14 as the youngest and first female driving champion from the Skip Barber Racing Series. Julia has explored and won in all types of racing, from go-karts to formula cars to stock cars. Now, at 25 years old, Julia has her NASCAR license and is making history with her wins in a local NASCAR series in Virginia. In the K&N Series, Julia finished fourth in the series championship, becoming the highest finishing female in the series' 62-year history. Julia is the only woman among 11 drivers picked in the 2016-17 NASCAR Next program that highlights future stars. As she climbs the NASCAR ladder, Julia uses her racing platform to continue advocating for women in sports and STEM, for education, and for following your dreams despite hurdles. She is a graduate of Stanford University and was recently selected as one of the 2017 Forbes 30 Under 30 honorees. So we are so lucky to have Julia with us today. So much interesting content to get into, so let's dive right in. So Julia, what are the three things we should know about being a NASCAR driver?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. This was really exciting. But, there is this preconceived notion of NASCAR racing as being these, Southern guys who are just sitting down and turning left. And really, it's so much more than that. I mean, it is a very real sport. So first, we are definitely athletes. If you think about it, we have to sit in an enclosed cockpit with the motor right up front. So the cockpit will get to be 130 degrees inside in the middle of the summer. And we're in full fire-resistant gear, a helmet, and we're muscling around 3,400 pounds for hours on end. I mean, it's exhausting, and you need strength and you need stamina. So it's a very athletic sport. I think the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is just how technologically advanced it is. We have sensors on the cars. We are, optimizing the performance of the machine with the constraints that we have with the racetrack and the tires and everything. So it's really a very intensive sport with a lot of input coming to the driver and to the crew chief that they have to sort through really quickly. And then the other thing is that, it is such a financially driven sport that really each driver should view themselves as a startup where they're responsible for, securing funding and, creating a brand that's recognizable amongst the fans and really, building a business where the product is them and their sport.
Great. And I definitely want to dive into that last piece a little later on in the show because I want to hear how you've created your brand. But you talked a little bit about how, you all are athletes. It's very technologically advanced. But tell me a little bit about the demographic makeup, because I know you said there's a stereotype that it's a lot of Southern men. And so, is there a lot of diversity in the sport? I know that there's not, traditionally that many women in it, but talk a little bit about that.
For sure. And when it comes to the driving, it's working on getting more diverse. There are a handful of minority drivers, Blacks and Hispanics, and a handful of women drivers in the developing ranks like I am, but still not the majority yet. But that's changing, and you see that more on the crew side also. There are more and more women engineers who are on the teams. And the interesting thing is that from a fan perspective, it's fairly diverse, and it's almost 50% female fan base. So that's what a lot of people don't realize. It's 47 to 48% female. And so it makes for a really interesting mix up of, who's like, in the race cars and on TV and who's watching. But it's growing, and you see more and more people in corporate who are more diverse. So it's a slow process, but we're making strides.
Cool. So when you look at race car driving now, what do you see now and in the future?
Well, right now, I mean, you see this interesting landscape where racing is still the second most watched sport on TV, but obviously consumer trends are changing and people are consuming sports in very different ways. So kind of seeing where, from a consumer standpoint, how NASCAR will be taken in is changing, and that's really cool. But from a sport perspective, I mean, you see, again, really cutting edge technology and the ability to show kind of what's going on behind the scenes, show some of the automation that's being incorporated with like pit lane officiating. And I think what we're going to see as we continue is, really interesting incorporation of modern digital technologies into maybe the cars, but also in everything else around at the track, in the stands. Really enhancing fan engagement, I think, is something that's on the horizon. And just kind of trying to fight through this shift to self-driving cars. I hope that NASCAR doesn't go away because of that. So it'll be interesting to see how the sport balances kind of an evolving technical society with the traditions of the sport.
Yeah, I never even thought about how self-driving cars would impact NASCAR, but it's sort of hard to imagine it going away and people going to the track to watch a bunch of like robots drive.
Right. Part of it's so interesting with NASCAR is there really is it's a season-long narrative. For 40 weeks you're on the road and you have to race against the same people every weekend. And so the drama that happens one weekend may last the full season. So there's that personal and that story component that wouldn't be there as much with just self-driving cars. So I'm hoping that it keeps race car drivers as, kind of these superstars who are doing something that very few people get to do. So we'll see. I mean, it's fascinating, though. It's a changing landscape for sure.
Yeah, and as you talk about technology, I know you're very involved in STEM as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, educate our listeners a little bit about what you're doing there and what you see there now and in the future as well.
Yeah, so I got a Bachelor of Science from Stanford and found a lot of really beneficial lessons from the computer science I took and from some of the, engineering design work I did. And just in terms of problem solving and in terms of how you can push your brain to do so much more. And so kind of trying to be an advocate for getting that type of more advanced STEM education into a lot of different schools. There are certain areas where there's still, computer science isn't an option. And the United States is going to be at a job deficit for how many people can fill these technical roles. And so it's really important for our society to have educated and capable technical people. And so a lot of what I do is try to, it's a lot of speaking, it's a lot of engaging with groups of younger kids and not only talking about the importance of STEM, but really showcasing how this broad topic of STEM can be applied to many different careers and many different industries. And it's not just like the stereotypical software engineer sitting in a dark basement, on a computer all day, right? Like, everything from, fashion has a lot of math in it. And, there's stuff where, especially for young girls who kind of have a harder time continuing through STEM because of various, social and cultural norms, showing that it's really applied to a whole lot. Cooking, makeup production. There's so much involves chemistry, science, everything. So it's just really exciting and trying to keep that excitement level up and encouraging people, especially minorities, that it's okay if you don't fit in right away, but really find the passion in the subject matter and use that to kind of propel you forward.
Great. So I want to shift gears a little bit. You talked originally about how important it is in NASCAR to really build your brand and that it's run a lot like a startup. And so I want to understand, one, how you really got into being a race car driver in the first place, and then 3 tactics for how you've been growing your brand in this space.
Yeah. First, I want to point out that I was very proud of that driving phrase you had, shifting gears. Pun probably not intended, but I appreciate it.
It wasn't intended, actually.
So I started racing go-karts when I was 10, and it was originally an activity that my parents wanted for my sister, brother, and I to do together as a family on the weekends, but they also specifically wanted their girls to compete against boys. So I fell in love with it. I wanted to be a professional race car driver by the time I was 12. I knew that. And so we knew that we had to figure out, how would we fund this trajectory? And I made my first sponsorship pitch. I'll use that in quotes because I wouldn't go back and do the same strategy again. But I made my first pitch when I was about 15. So that's 10 years ago now. And then in college, I really focused on, refining not only my brand, but, my literacy in business and my ability to present value and ROI to potential investors or partners. And the biggest lesson that I learned was really to be authentic in terms of building an audience. Being a New Yorker and a college grad in the South, I thought, oh, there's going to be all these preconceived notions of me. And so I have to make sure not to step on toes, and I have to make sure not to, annoy anyone or piss anyone off. And I realized that I was just becoming very bland with that. I wasn't letting my true colors show. And so it took some getting used to being comfortable sharing articles that I was interested in, or being, really optimistic and enthusiastic in my social posts, and learning how to interview in a way that really showed my personality, and really just practice all of that. And so that was a big one. Authenticity is huge for building a brand. Another one is networking. I mean, it is so, so, so important no matter what you're doing to be able to get out there, get people to know about you. I mean, I'm still, I'm hustling all the time to network, and you never know who might know who could help you or who might get excited by you. And it gives you, again, that chance to practice your elevator pitch, if you will. Within a few seconds, being able to really captivate whoever you're talking to is very important no matter what. So we have authenticity and networking. And then the third thing I would have to say is that you have to believe in your brand or who you are at 100%. I mean, there's always going to be people who are questioning, why are you doing this? When I was graduating Stanford, it was like, okay, what are you going to do with your degree? And I would say, I'm going racing. And they're like, okay, but what are you doing with your degree? And there was a lot of doubt around what I was doing. There are only 40 professional top-level NASCAR drivers in the world. So needing to have the full confidence so that when other people didn't believe in me, I still had the chutzpah to go after it.
Yeah, I love that. So much of what you're saying resonates, with me personally, and I think with the rest of us. So when you're talking about being authentic, that's something that can be really hard, because if you're in like a corporate environment or a university environment, a lot of times you're kind of just better off kind of going along with whatever the culture is there. And so you end up sort of being like everybody else. And that doesn't really help you stand out. And especially when you go off on your own and do something where you need to have your own brand, it can be a tricky transition. How do you be authentic but not feel like you're alienating people that might be your fans or your customers or your prospects? So that can definitely be a tricky balance. But, the best person to be is yourself. And if people don't like it, they're probably not the audience that you're going after, that they're, you want people to resonate with the true you. So I totally get what you're saying there. I also like what you said about believing in your brand. And this is so true for anyone that's going off on their own in any type of venture, because you really need to believe in what you're doing at the end of the day. You're going to have people that are giving you advice from all different places. And I've found a lot of times people are giving me advice, but they've never even done what I'm doing. And they might be sitting, in their corporate job working for somebody else, but they have a lot of thoughts and opinions about what I should be doing in my business, even though they've never gone off on their own themselves. And so you have to have a thick skin and have enough conviction in yourself and what you're doing to not let those things get in your head too much. So those points really, really resonate with me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also that, kind of that point to getting a lot of advice from a lot of people, even if the people who are trying to give advice are completely well-intentioned, again, they're coming from a different background. They have a different idea of what you're doing. And so they might mean the best for you, but really the advice may or may not be helpful. And so that's where I think it's really important to also have a small group of people, whether it's 1, 3, 4, whatever, of people who have your back, whether that's family, whether that's close friends or mentors. That's been really important to me, because I definitely, I think a lot about what people tell me and the advice they give me, and it's not always what's best for me. And having kind of a reference that I can go back to and say, hey, is this real? Should I be listening to this? Is really helpful. So I definitely encourage that kind of close bond between a few people to help out.
Absolutely. And like Julia said, a lot of these people giving you advice, their intentions are good. So then it becomes even harder to kind of know what to take from it and what to kind of put aside. So great point there. I also want to go back to something else you said. You said when you were in college, You learned a lot about presenting your value proposition and the ROI that investors would get from you. And could you give us some tips of how best to do that or what's worked well for you?
Yeah, so mine, I feel like a little trickier because NASCAR is definitely a hard sell. NASCAR partnership is a hard sell. And so what I've always tried to do is there's the obvious return. There's the placement on the car, there's exposure via TV, like there's all the traditional returns for a company. But then I really kind of dove deep into what do I have to offer that no other racers do? And for me, one thing is, I really love public speaking and motivational speaking, and that is an asset to a lot of corporations that would be great to have. I have other partners and kind of proposing B2B opportunities for new partners is a big thing, but it comes down to doing a ton of research where a lot of the information is not going to be worthwhile, but you'll come across the handful of things that will give you insight into what problems the company is trying to solve. And I think if you've got someone who's interested in hearing about you and interested in you, having that open dialogue about, okay, well, what are you guys trying to do with this initiative? What's most important on your list, and let me see if I can help that. So that's just really important. I think showing that you've done homework and that you're there to benefit all parties involved, not just yourself, is really important.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of points. I have a coaching program, and a lot of what I coach startups on is exactly what you said, creating this differentiated value proposition and doing the market research to understand, where you fit into that broader market, what your potential investors' needs are, the things that get them excited, and doing that homework and figuring out how you can create value to solve the things they care about and your customers' problems, in addition to being able to create some benefit for yourself. So that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, like what you think is most beneficial isn't necessarily what the company or the investor you're approaching thinks is most beneficial. So you got to kind of be humble enough to realize that you might not have all the answers, I think.
Exactly. Listening is a really big part of it.
Yeah.
So tell us about a time when you've stagnated or stopped making progress. I think you've chosen a career path that is ultra competitive and challenging really for anyone, but you're young, you're female. I'm sure it makes it even harder. So tell us about a time that you've faced some adversity and how you've kind of come out on the other side.
Yeah, that's a great question because, it's really easy in racing. Either you're winning or you're not. And, for me, that's kind of the cut and dry way to measure success. And obviously there's more to it. You set realistic goals for every season, but there were a handful, especially while I was in college, where I wasn't as successful on track. And I think it was really because I was dividing my attention quite a bit, and school is incredibly challenging. And I guess I was sacrificing kind of the on-track performance to really take advantage of the off-track stuff that I was learning at school, both, to be a better person and become more educated, because education is really important to me, but also, again, from that business side. So what it really took was kind of prioritizing how I wanted to spend my time, and graduating definitely helped because it was, I was able to then focus 100% on racing. So even if I was doing business, there weren't the social distractions. There weren't this like influx of things that you could do at any given time that were distracting. And, in my first full season outside of college, I ended up winning half my races and getting a championship. So really, I think the, cleaning out your life and reprioritizing and focusing on what you're trying to do, especially if you've had a little bit of a lull, is very important. Like give it everything you've got stab. And if it's still an issue, then maybe reassess. But the other thing is that, with racing partnership, and my racing partnership definitely goes beyond just the racing component, but you'll get so many more no's before you get a yes. And we've gone through years of getting no's before getting a yes. And it's really, that goes back to believing in the product. And, when someone tells me no, I kind of think, okay, well, either it's just not the right time, they just don't have the budget, or it's not the initiative they're going after, or they don't understand the value of this, or I didn't articulate it properly. So I never take no as just like, I'm not worth it. I figure out another way to spin it, even if it's just for me personally, to keep going, persevering. It's so important.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think rejection is unfortunately just a part of life. When you're in business for yourself or you're an elite athlete, you're going to hear a lot of no's until suddenly everyone wants to say yes to you, which doesn't always happen really for anyone a lot of times, unless you're like Michael Jordan or someone. So you really have to be able to go back to believing in yourself and have that thick skin, and also use those no's and try to probe into why people are saying no, and if you can eventually turn them into a yes by really understanding their reasons for not saying yes right away. So I've had my share of no's too. I know it doesn't feel good, but it does help you grow. The point you made about focus and priorities, that's so true. When I'm working with clients in the startup space, I do feel like the ones that are really focused on just building their business are more successful than the ones that are maybe doing it off the side or trying to work on a couple businesses at the same time, because usually they're pulled in too many directions and can't give that full attention to one thing, which is really needed when you're building something. So that's very relatable as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So tell us, you said, your season is 40 weeks long. I know you're doing things with STEM as well. You're not only race car driving, you're building this whole brand. How do you keep a work-life balance and just take some time for self-care?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I will clarify that my personal season is not 40 weeks. That's the top level of NASCAR, but I'm still racing. My first race, is March 18th and it goes until November. So it's still a long season.
Yeah.
And I think I'm quite lucky that because my job is still so physically based, like I need to prioritize sleep for muscle regeneration after a workout. I need to prioritize healthy eating. And because I work from home when I'm not at the shop or on the track, it cuts down the commute time, quite honestly. Like that is a huge thing that I know I don't have to deal with. But I've always been the type of person who is in tune with her gut. And so I know that if I need a night, then I take a night, and I will prioritize my health and well-being over, seeing friends, being social. It's just really important to me to feel balanced. And again, I understand I'm in a privileged position that I can still do that, and I don't have dependents. So that's a huge thing. I'm really, it's me. But I think it really comes down to being able to read yourself. There are some weeks when I can just keep going forever and I don't feel like I need to, take a break. And then there's some weeks where every day I'll need to take a little nap. I mean, just whatever you need to do. But I think one thing that helps me keep going is the fact that I have to exercise every day. And exercising is so good for mental clarity, for pushing yourself, for making you feel better. And it allows an escape that also helps your brain kind of come up with ideas. My best ideas still come up at the gym and in the shower. So it's those relaxing moments. And I definitely take long showers to kind of, treat myself.
Yeah.
But it just, that comes back down to priorities again, right? And if you need to make something happen, you'll figure out a way to.
Yeah. I mean, I think with athletes, they don't really have a choice. They have to remain in shape and be good to their bodies, or their bodies are not going to work at their optimal level, which is what their job really depends on.
That's what we're paid to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, for entrepreneurs, they don't look at it like we don't look at it the same way, because we're like, we got to produce, we have to do X, Y, Z. And usually it's not dependent on necessarily our physical appearance or how often we hit the gym or what food we're putting in our bodies, except that really those things do make us better. And so I think entrepreneurs could get better at taking some of those cues from athletes and thinking about the role of sleep and what we put into our bodies, how it can really impact our performance as well.
Oh, totally. And, there are plenty of studies that show that constantly being on is less productive than if you take time off. And, my parents always said that, and they're two professionals, but they always said that throughout college and early in their careers, they would always take Friday night into Saturday night off. Like almost no matter what, they would take a 24-hour period to let their brains feel better, and it helped them get through the rest of the week more efficiently. So I really think that off time is important, and putting screens away is good.
Yes. So you've given us a lot of really great tips today, but let's go ahead and close out with a parting piece of guidance for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest piece of guidance is kind of what I've alluded to earlier in the podcast, but this never-ending can-do, perseverant attitude. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And there are so many factors that are not in your control. But if you maximize what is in your control, your ability to keep going, your ability to fine tune and articulate your message, your ability to produce, whatever it is, focus on what you can control and try not to lose too much sleep over what you can't, because so much of success comes down to some luck or timing. And keeping that in mind has been very helpful for me. And I know those several pieces of advice, but you can only do so much. But as long as you are doing the most for what's in your control, the most successful you're going to be.
Yes. So maximize what's in your control. keep going and keep driving forward, pun intended.
That's right. I love it.
So I hope today's episode inspires you to think more about how you can find your passion and live your best life. For more information, including links to resources that Julia and I chatted about today and how best to get in touch with her, head on over to our website, theboostpodcast.com, and check out our show notes from this episode and catch the Boost bonus. Julia, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. And remember, anything is possible for you.
Now that you've completed this episode, the next step is to join the Boost Squad for strategic insights, tips, and tricks, as well as exclusive resources designed specifically to accelerate your personal and professional growth. All this and more is waiting for you at theboostpodcast.com.